Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of that thing we call Tilt Mets Do Us Part. We are live on YouTube. We are live on Twitter like we are each and every single week, Wednesday at 5:30 Eastern or thereabouts. John Sapanaro out in Los Angeles, California. My co-host, Matt Ibby Ibanez, holding things down back in New Jersey. Ibby, we have a jam-packed show today considering the Mets are not good and out of it and all that stuff. But we have a really great guest lined up and a conversation I think that people want to have in advance of the end of the season, the off season, and next season, of course. So I'm pumped up for all that. But how you feeling?
I'm doing well, John. Thank you for asking, as always. I agree with you. Like, there's not much going on with our Mets. There are things to look out for. Obviously, Pete's heating up and Lindor's having a great year, and we still love watching Brandon. And obviously the home run chase for Francisco.
Are you sure Lindor's having a good year? Because Twitter told me that he's terrible. So I don't know what to think.
Twitter does rule the roost. We know that. But in my opinion, he's having a good year at least. But yeah, I'm very excited for this episode because number one, fantastic guest. I'm glad he's coming back. And yeah, the Mets themselves have really turned into a prospect-driven conversation because of how things went at the deadline. And it's only proper to bring in our guest today to help break some things down because I think there's a lot of thoughts. There's a lot of questions that are being asked about players that we have in the system, players that were brought into the system. So I think a lot of questions are going to be answered. I'm expecting a good showing today from the chat. I'm sure they're going to show out as always. And let's do this. Let's introduce our guest. And I also wanted to start out there. I think it was fitting that I had to put on the St. Lucie hat today for our guest. I thought it was proper. But yeah, let's do this.
That's a good one. I don't have any minor league hats for Mets affiliates, so my hat game, unlike yours, is not as strong, is not as significant.
A little Binghamton, a little Rumble Pony.
Wow,
I wasn't sure. Got a little.
Are they just on top of your computer? Like, what are you?
I have a little shelf right in front of me. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. We got Shay. We got a lot of people in the chat, and I'm sure, like you said, it's gonna go off. But
they're gonna bring it. Yeah.
Shay saying, "I can't wait for the show. I love talking prospects more than anything." Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, that's all we can talk about really with the Mets. But fortunately, we have a prospect guru in our midst, especially as it relates to the Mets. Obviously, you're wearing the St. Lucie hat. So Port St. Lucie, PSL to Flushing, Joe DeMayo of the Mets Pod, powered by SNY. Joe is back with us. Joe, it is always nice to work with you, man. It's always good to have you on the show. How you doing?
Doing great. Love the hat. And yeah, PSL to Flushing. So very fitting. That was I remember having to answer for a while what that actually means. Because when I started the Twitter account, minor league baseball was not nearly as popular as it was. So people are like, what does PSL to Flushing mean? And now it makes a ton of sense.
It seems like everybody knows now. It's funny because that I think it was Michael Mayer tweeted out the play that David Wright did in San Diego, that over the head barehanded catch. And, I couldn't believe I was like 18 fucking years ago. Are you kidding me? But it's just so funny to see, like, in our lifetime, the difference between, the Twitter world, the social media world that has kind of just exploded, even over the last decade, less than a decade, 5 years. Like, it is crazy that there was one point, a time where, like, you couldn't follow minor league baseball unless you worked for teams in minor league baseball. And now there's people like you who, do it to a level that is, exemplary. It's absolutely fantastic. So we are thrilled to have you on the show. We are very happy that you could take the time out of your schedule. Carson, always dropping the heat. Carson, we appreciate you. So, Joe, look, you had a tweet yourself a couple of days ago. You said, look, I'm bummed that the Mets aren't in contention, and I'm paraphrasing here, but, at least now I get to talk about prospects, which is something you've always obviously had a passion to do. So the first thing I want to ask you right out of the gate is, was there anyone that the Mets got at the trade deadline that truly surprised you, where you said, I cannot believe they got this guy?
A couple, actually. So okay. I would say getting Luis Angel Acuna for Max Scherzer was a surprise, because we were talking on the Mets pod, Connor Rogers and myself, who do the Mets pod for SNY. We were talking about in text and on the show, like if they trade Max Scherzer, is it just going to be a salary dump? Are they going to eat money so they could get a reasonable prospect? And I mean, you also read, source stuff from like the New York Post and different places that are like, yeah, if they eat a bunch of his money, they could get maybe an okay prospect, but probably not a top 100 guy. And they managed to get Luis Angel Acuna, who, depending on where you look, is, let's just call it top 50, 75, somewhere in that range, but a top 100 guy for sure. So maybe I was clouded by a lot of the public reporting, but I was surprised they got someone of his quality. And then not saying Jeremiah Jackson is this fantastic prospect, but they got a prospect for Dominic Leone. So all due respect to Dominic Leone, I don't want to be disrespectful to him, but certainly when he was traded, and I saw that tweet, I was like, Dominic Leone, all right, they're just clearing a 40-man roster spot for someone. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, oh, they got a player, and a player that, maybe has like a utility player type upside for a guy that wasn't too great for the Mets.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked about it on this show, Ibby, I don't remember if it was our show the day after or if it was the show that we did with Carson and with Aunt Rivera, where it was happening in real time. But it reminded me, Joe, of a smaller version of what the Mets did with R.A. Dickey. They go and they get R.A. Dickey off the street. He winds up having a great 2 seasons for them. They flip him and they get Syndergaard and d'Arnaud back and that whole thing. And obviously this is not that. No one's going to confuse it. But the fact that they signed Dominic Leone off the scrap heap and get anything back for him, I think was really mind-blowing, honestly. And I think listen, Billy Epler is going to get criticism, rightfully so, but I think moves like that are nice. Look, we have Shay saying it was Ryan Clifford for him that was the surprising guy, and we're going to talk a little bit about him specifically in a little bit. This one, Joe, I don't want you to necessarily tear into this now because we can get into a lot of these top guys, especially your top 10 list specifically. But Jeff Cohen asking a good overarching question. So I know this is kind of open-ended when you say how many prospects have a legitimate chance to make an impact. We don't know what impact is, right? Your definition might be different than mine, might be different than Jeff's, might be different than Ibby's. But in your opinion, how many of these prospects, and let's just say in your top 10, do you think have a legitimate chance to make some kind of impact with the major league team?
Honestly, when you look at that list, I think all 10. I think this is one of the best top 10 lists that I've ever put together as someone covering the Mets minors. Obviously, like you said, impact is differing. And I think obviously if you look towards the top, there are guys I feel a little better about than people towards the bottom of that top 10. But even a guy like Marco Vargas, like you said, we'll get into these prospects, but I feel good about every single member of that top 10. Odds suggest only a chunk of them are going to make the major leagues, let alone be impactful major leaguers. But hey, it's the way of playing numbers. It's playing probabilities. Like if you want to say 20% or whatever number you want to throw out of like higher end prospects make the major leagues, you'd rather have 20% of 10, 12, 13 than 20% of 3, which is something the Mets for years have done. They'd have a couple blue chip guys and then it would just fall off a cliff. And making prior top 20 lists was a bit of a struggle to fit guys in that actually felt like legitimate prospects. Now there's guys who I had to cut out of my top 20 list that I did for SNY because there's at this point more talent in the system than there has been in years.
Wow. I love to hear that. Ibby, when you look at Joe's list, and obviously this is the same list that Joe put out for the Mets pod and for SNY, was there anything that made you raise your eyebrows? Because obviously people are going to rank prospects differently, whether it's Joe, whether it's the other, rankings, Baseball America and all these places. There seems to be some consensus ones, but is there anything on his list that made you go,
Not necessarily, mainly because I frequently follow Joe and read his stuff, so I know how big of a Jet Williams fan he is, and how much he's put him over ever since that draft when the Mets took him. So I know that was a question for some people, but I understood it because I see what Joe has been saying about him, and to just follow that up, I know that Jet has been on an absolute tear lately. So I'm just curious, with your projections, where you see him. You have him ranked second. I know it's tough to say what position he might be placed at or where they might end up working him more often than not. could be middle infield, could be somewhere in the outfield. They acquired some outfielders. Where do you think he might truly end up? And the follow-up to that is, how quickly do you think he can move through the minor league system?
So I think long-term, his best position is probably second base. But if you talk to certain scouts, they'll say he's a center fielder. So he's obviously a dynamic athlete. He's made significant strides this year. Like I knew coming into the draft, he was behind Tamar Johnson as the second best bat to ball skills high school player in the class. What I didn't realize was how great his plate discipline was. And he has a million walks this year. I can't even keep up every day. He walked once, twice, 3 times. And it's not, and watching the games, it's not just he's drawing walks because pitchers are throwing balls 2 feet outside that you just don't swing at. He's taking close pitches. He's taking breaking balls low. And now, and early in the season, he wasn't hitting for an average. It was like he was hitting 220, 225, but he had a 410 on base percentage or something like that. Now the batting average is starting to come around. He has, in a very early going, he has 1,000 OPS or a 1 OPS. So whatever you do, I say 1,000 OPS with Brooklyn, over 900 over his last month and a half. Right. So to me, Jet Williams is a guy that I'm higher on than the rest of the community, and I'm okay with that. There's guys that I'm lower on than others, and I think he has the chance to be an absolute spark plug of a player. I believe I put 2026 as his ETA in my top 20 on SNY. Yep, there you go, 2026. So I say 2026, but then I just watch him mash in Brooklyn. And I'm like, maybe I'm a year too long, but I would say my general player development like mindset is I'm much more passive. So I don't work for a player development, but I've been around to understand how it works. And I'm more passive as far as timelines, I guess, maybe than some others would be. But it wouldn't shock me if Jet beat my 2026 timeline.
Okay. Also great to hear. A lot of great comments coming in. Keep those coming in. We will get to also, dump all your questions in here for Joe. We'll get to him as we can. And as it makes sense in the conversation, I don't want to jump from one guy to another and bounce back and forth a million times. Try to keep the conversation tight. So even if there's one here that I want to get to later, like I see one from Douglas Barnes, I do want to get to that. That'll probably be a little later. So make sure that you stick around. Shay saying overall, it's a great list. I mean, Matt Allen and Calvin Ziegler aren't even within the top 10. The past lists, when they got injured, seemed like the minor leagues were doomed. So really great point there that it's just kind of pushing off, some of these guys who, maybe have talent, but you're kind of worried about. And Carson saying, I'm afraid Matt Allen doesn't exist.
I feel so bad for the guy. I really do. I do want to throw something in real quick, because you're saying how, John, you're mentioning how the, new names come in, and obviously we're seeing names that we're so used to seeing within our top 10. Now they really get dropped down. It shows you how much of an influx of talent has really come into the system to really make the overall system rise through the ranks. I want to just mention, because I know it was such a hot button topic for a lot of Mets Twitter, a lot of Mets fans, when it came to David Robertson. He was dealt early. People thought earlier than he should have been and weren't really sure on the return. I opted to wait and see, because I wanted to see what other relievers were going to garner on the market. Joe, in your opinion, based off of other relievers that were dealt and the returns that they got, do you think Marco Vargas and Hernandez were a strong return for David Robertson?
I do, 100%. I do.
Yeah.
The Mets specifically had a lot of information about both Vargas and Hernandez, because everyone's like, oh, they played in rookie ball. Well, they played in the Florida Complex League, and in the division that the Mets play in, the Marlins are also there. And I think it's like 6 or 7 teams, and they just rotate and play each other over and over and over for months. So they had, given that it was in the St. Lucie backfields, which is where a lot of their analytics team is based, where a lot of their player development team is based. Obviously, scouts are based there as well. They were able to get extended looks at Marco Vargas and Ronald Hernandez from every level, whereas we'll talk about Luis Angel Acuna, but like if they wanted to scout him, they had to send their Texas area scout and say, go to Texas and look at Luis Angel, whereas they had kind of like a bunch of people that just are watching the Mets game, but also can conveniently be looking at the other players. And talking to people down there, they thought Marco Vargas was hands down the best player on the Marlins Florida Complex League team, and showed out as one of the better players in the Florida Complex League as a whole. Just a young player, and a lot of the young players, when you're talking 18 years old and you're talking 19 years old and even 17 in the case of some players, like the one they got from the Diamondbacks in the FAM deal, when you're dealing with that, if they weren't huge signing bonus guys, it takes a couple years for the public to kind of catch up to what they are as a prospect, because you keep an eye on the guy that signs for $1.5 million. You don't keep an eye on the guy that signs for $75,000. And I'm pretty sure that's what Marco Vargas signed for, definitely a lower sum along those lines. But it's elite level, and I don't throw elite around too much. Elite level plate discipline for his age. I mean, doesn't swing and miss, doesn't chase. The exit velocities are not as good as they were in the Dominican Summer League. Like last year there, he was in the 90th percentile. I don't know exactly what he's at now, but it's come down a little bit, but it's bat the ball skills. It's knowing the strike zone, knowing what to swing at. Another guy that projects as a second baseman long-term in Vargas. And I know some people are going to have him higher in their list than I do. So I just lean on the side of, a lot of people have gotten maybe too far on Alex Ramirez, kind of in the other direction. And I'm a big believer in Blade Tidwell. He's a guy that I will be higher on probably than a lot of the other people in the prospect community. But Vargas, Mets love him. I'm a fan of him. I obviously haven't seen too much of him personally, but you talk to enough people and you figure it out. And Ronald Hernandez, really quickly on him, advanced catcher for his age. Bilingual already at 9. I think he's 19, so has the ability to work with both English and Spanish speaking staff and teammates. Shows he's a bit of a stronger kid, shows some power, but also big time plate discipline. And every prospect we talk about, plate discipline is going to be a topic. It's something that the Mets purposely were seeking out when they were making trades.
Did I read it properly when it came to Vargas? Doesn't he have like one of the best, or if not the best, when it comes to strikeout to walk ratio, something along those lines? So hearing all the things that you're saying,
I'll believe Twitter, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. I don't even know how the heck they found that stat, but it was something like over the last decade, he was top 3 or 4 in strikeout to walk ratio. But I mean, it speaks to his skill set, so I'll just assume they were right.
Okay.
We got Yoshi Yamamoto, the future Met, in the comments saying, I don't care if I get a lifetime ban for saying this. Epler, the legend. I can't believe Mets got anything for these players. And I listen, again, I think criticism is fine when criticism is due. And I think you also have to give people flowers when they deserve them. And I think Epler had a really good deadline.
Epler the seller is better than Epler the buyer.
At this point. And listen, obviously, Steve Cohen's money plays a factor, because him being willing to kick in so much is why they were able to get the returns that they did. But you still have to negotiate the deals, and it's not nothing. And so again, you got to give credit where credit is due. This is Till Mets Do Us Part. We're live on YouTube. We are live on Twitter. If you are watching, hit the thumbs up. Thank you, Ibby. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez, our guest this week, Joe DeMayo, aka at PSL the Flushing on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. I don't care. I'm going to keep on calling it Twitter. Because X just sounds weird and it's strange, and I don't know how to navigate that in my brain yet, but eventually we will get to it. Of course, he is of the Mets pod on SNY, does absolutely fantastic work alongside Connor Rogers. Give them a listen as well. But I want to ask you this, Joe. Where would you rank the Mets farm system before the deadline and then after the deadline? You can also factor in the draft, which obviously happened a little bit earlier. So if you want to say, where would you rank the Mets farm system at the beginning of this season versus right now today among the other major league teams?
I would say I put this in my top 20 article as well that you could read on SNY.TV. So listen to us, but also read. I wrote, 2,800 words on 20 guys. So please go ahead and give that a read. But I would say prior to the deadline and this time, they were in the 15, 18, something like that. They were like middle of the pack to slightly below, which naturally is going to happen when you graduate arguably the best prospect in baseball in Francisco Alvarez, and you graduate despite him heading back to AAA. Brett Beatty was a top 15, 20 prospect in the sport. Mark Vientos, for whatever he was worth, has fallen off prospect lists as well. So that kind of fluctuates some things. I don't think you can reasonably say the Mets are not a top 10 farm system in baseball right now. And if you gave me an argument that they were closer to top 5, I don't think I'd fight you too hard on it, because when I look at my top 10, I see a bunch of guys that I'm like, these are top 100 prospects, or these are soon to be top 100 prospects. So they're definitely, what they've done over the last, let's call it month and a half, because we'll bring the draft in as well. The draft, the trade deadline, and Billy Epler said this, and Steve Cohen, I believe, as well publicly, but I firmly agree with them that they made the kind of turnaround at the top level of your system that would generally take a team 2 to 3 years to do. Yes. And they did it in a couple weeks just by nature of the draft. And then Steve, like you mentioned, Steve Cohen willing to pitch in the money, and unfortunately selling some of the better players that were available at the deadline in a seller's market. So it truly was a perfect storm for them at the deadline for this whole situation to just come to fruition.
I think that's one of the things too, when people are like, oh, this is going to come up in the collective bargaining agreement next time because he just went out and he bought a farm system on the fly. And I understand why people say that, Joe, but at the same time, this is not a scenario that's going to happen every single year. This is not a scenario that's going to happen for every team. The Mets had a wealth in terms of commodities that were available in a seller's market, namely 2 top flight pitchers who were on short-term deals, making them available to most teams. And you have an owner who's willing to kick in money. So I don't really buy that rhetoric that this is going to be something that gets revisited. You know, I understand why it could, and I understand that the other owners don't like Steve Cohen because he throws his money around. But to me, this is a perfect storm situation. This is not going to become like the new normal in baseball.
No, it won't. And let's be honest, too, there's not exactly a bunch of owners that are willing to do this anyway, to pitch in this kind of money. And let's be honest, they made a trade with a handful of teams. So I don't think some of these teams are not too unhappy that I'm sure the Astros aren't all that unhappy that the Mets paid a whole mess of Justin Verlander's money. The Rangers aren't mad that the Mets paid a bunch of Max's money. The Brewers probably happy that they paid Mark Canha's money, and down the line Eduardo Escobar, etc. So I think it's funny to see from the outside where we are of last year, or in the spring, I should say. There were sources and all this that owners were upset with what Steve Cohen spent on the team. He's going to ruin the market. And I don't think he redefined a ton of markets. He just spent on a bunch of players, and it just kind of came together to make the payroll that it was. And they're like, he's spending too much. This is bad, despite the fact that luxury tax money gets thrown back to teams, and whatever that is, what it is. And now the argument is, whoa. You can't buy a farm system. So I want to know what can Steve Cohen spend his money on? Someone give him the rules.
Yeah. What is he allowed to do, right? And I know it's a million years ago now, but in the 90s and early 2000s when the Yankees were doing this, the Yankees weren't ruining baseball. That's the thing that always really frustrates me, and I'm sure it frustrates the both of you and our listeners and our viewers and all that stuff. It's like all of a sudden, the Mets finally get to be the big boys. The Mets finally get out of the shadow of the Wilpons debacle, and now, oh my God, this is the worst thing for baseball. Like, fuck off.
I'm telling you. I said this from the jump when it came to Cohen, when people were complaining about this. I continue to believe this. When it comes to New York, they want a king. And they want a jester. That's what they want. That whenever they promote these types of things, you got to have a good, but you also have to have a bad. Everything is always all good. There's nothing to talk about, and they need things to talk about. So you have to keep on making fun of the Mets, even though, and I don't care for the Yanks. I don't talk about the Yanks. This is a Met show, but I think there's been a lot more circus when it comes to the Yanks, that people want to actually talk about. But that's, of course, not allowed when it comes to media.
Absolutely. Listen, if the Anthony Rizzo thing happened on the Mets, it would be a field day.
Forget about it. It's Ryan Church all over again.
Months, years that we'd be talking about this. Let's jump back in the comments real quick. Douglas Barnes saying, Mets 2023 MVP, Cohen's money. Absolutely true. Jeff Cohen saying, here's some outside of the box thinking. Cohen, not just extremely wealthy, but smart too. Yeah, I think absolutely. And then reacting to what we're saying now, Steve Cohen always says he plays within the rules. These are the rules of MLB. This is how it works. Keith Blacknick, hey guys, just pop it in. Oh, DeMayo, I'm out. He said that a little bit ago. I missed it in the shuffle.
I hope he's gone.
I love the playful jabs back and forth from Joe DeMayo and Keith Blacknick over at QBC. Let me ask you this, Joe. We got about, 5, 6, 7 minutes before we head into the break. One thing that seems to be the constant with this Mets prospect talk and the rankings across the board is Acuna. Acuna is on every list that I've seen. He's number one. So I assume that on anybody's list, he's going to be number one. If not, he's on most cases. That's where he's at. So for you, what is it that makes him stand out as the consensus number one? And then as a follow-up to that, do you think that he was the single best prospect that was traded at the deadline?
So quickly on the last one, yes, I think he was the top one. And most MLB Pipeline put out a great article. Sam Dykstra does a fantastic job there. I think he's going to be actually be doing the Mets updated list here soon. But Sam does great work. He ranked every single prospect that was traded at the deadline, 1 to, I don't even know how many prospects were traded. And he had Acuna number 1 and Drew Gilbert number 2.
Yeah, we referenced that last week.
Yeah. So in his eyes, they're two best. I think Acuna was the best prospect traded. What I like the most about Acuna is he still has some upside, but he feels almost like a high floor player, which I think when a lot of people do prospect rankings, I try to mesh. Yeah. I try to mesh ETA as well as ceiling and floor. It's not just rank the highest upside that exists. I think Acuna has a floor to be an average regular and potentially be certainly more than that, above average. He's not going to be Ronald, and that's okay. I was joking with someone. They were like, how's he compared to his brother? I said, if he's half as good of his brother, he's going to be an 8-time All-Star. that's how good Ronald is. Yeah. So, I mean, but to talk about his general skill set, he's made great strides on his general bat to ball skills. His swing and miss rate has dropped like 4% from last year. He's willing to take some pitches. He'll take some walks. He does still chase breaking balls on occasion, some tough ones, but he's improving at that. He has a really good level swing, hits line drives. He's a smaller guy. It's actually funny when you think about the top 3 on my. I'm taller than all 3 players.
They're all short, tiny. Yeah.
The top 3 on the list. I'm 5'10", and I'm taller than the top 3 prospects in the Mets system.
Hey, let the short kings get some play, guys. Okay,
hey,
the 2 of you. Okay,
I mean it though. Baseball. You
could be 5'6" and be pretty good.
Baseball's transitioning away from like that prototypical model. I think now. Right. Like that's where analytics has come into play, where it's like now we have batted ball data on everything. So you could be 6'3", you could be 5'8", but what's the batted ball data? But Acuna hits the ball hard, hits line drives, gap to gap, big time athlete. And that's what stood out to me in the early going for Bingham. Yeah. So if you just look at his stats over a week of games, which obviously don't mean a ton, but over like a week or so of games, you're not going to be overly impressed by like his general stat line. But man, he's an electric athlete. So we're recording here on Wednesday. In Tuesday's game, he got hit in the foot by a pitch. Didn't seem like he knew he got hit in the foot by the pitch. Like he tried to get back in the box, and the umpire's like, "Yo, go to first, man. You got hit." He's like, "Okay." So he proceeded to steal second, steal third. Drew Gilbert hit a chopper to first base, and he beat that play home. So definitely an electric athlete. Plays shortstop. Best transitions probably at second base. He's dabbled in center field, but I think he's more comfortable in the dirt. And he's a top of the order kind of guy, which is kind of my top 2 guys. Like they're building a different type of farm system. Like maybe it's a zig while others are zagging, where the game has transitioned into this launch angle, 3 true outcomes, home run, strikeout, walk world. The Mets, which you saw some on the 2022 team as well, they're prioritizing some speed, some bat-to-ball skills, maybe trying to, in a sense, it's something what Arizona did, where Arizona Diamondbacks have pivoted, and you see Corbin Carroll and Alec Thomas and all these guys that are, Corbin Carroll's a special player, but it's a lot of speed and athleticism, and the Mets are prioritizing that. And Luis Angel Acuna certainly has the confidence that his brother has, and obviously they have a bet, apparently a $5,000 bet on who will steal more bases. I think it's messed up that Ronald's going to I hope he doesn't force his brother to give him $5,000 if he beats him, because he has over $100 million contract, so he shouldn't do that. But Love Luis Angel, and there's a reason he topped the list.
Joe K saying the Mets may have sold at the deadline, but the Rumble Ponies bought, to your point on, how good that Double-A team looks right now.
Yeah.
So fun to watch the Rumble Ponies. Now last night I wasn't watching the Mets game. I have MILB.TV and I just airplayed the Rumble Ponies game on my TV. So I watched that instead. I mean, look, it's Luis Angel Acuna, it's Drew Gilbert, Jeremiah Jackson's there, and the pitching staff there is pretty stacked. Like most of the Mets top pitchers are there. I mean, Blade Tidwell pitched today on Wednesday and threw his longest outing of his career, 7 2/3, gave up 2 runs. He recently was promoted there. Tyler Stewart leads all of minor league baseball in ERA. He's in that rotation. Christian Scott is a guy I'm a big fan of. He's in that rotation. So the pitching staff is really good. Now 2 of their 3 top hitters are there too. The Binghamton team is a very fun team to watch for the next month and change.
I'm going to say this, Ibby. I swear to God, this is the only time I'm ever going to say this in my life. Never said it before, and I probably will never say it again. I wish I lived closer to Binghamton.
Well,
I love seeing them in Hartford. That's where I love to see.
I will say this. It's funny that the Rumble Ponies are becoming a thing, because I remember the first time me and John met. Or I should say second time, because we did the show live once together. Second time we went to a Mets game, and he says, are you looking to buy anything? And I was like, I've been trying to really find this Rumble Ponies hat. I felt him look at me like, the fuck do you want a Rumble Ponies hat for? But luckily I finally got the hat. But I am excited because they're in town. I live 25 minutes away from Somerset, so I'm going to see them on Saturday, and I believe Christian Scott is on the mound. So I'm very excited that I get to see Acuna, I get to see Gilbert. It seems like a very fun team to watch, so I am pumped up that I get to see them on Saturday. So that should be a good time.
Listen, people know me. You guys all follow me on Twitter, the 2 of you and everybody in the chat and stuff. I'm an asshole. I like to do it. I like to just see what people react. It's all fine. Yeah, listen, I just came back. This is not the show to talk about this, but I went to the Savannah Bananas game in Savannah on Thursday. It was the most fun thing I have ever been a part of. We can talk about that later or on another show or whatever. Yeah. But man, oh man, that is an absolute blasty blast. And, listen, minor league baseball is fun, but what they're doing over there is a pure spectacle in the best possible way. And I know it's sold out for like 2 years. And I know they're like on the secondary market, they're like $400 or more or whatever in some places, which is gross. Like, unless you have like an absurd amount of money coming in, like save that money for Mets World Series tickets. But it's a fun time. Let's head into the break. We have plenty more here with Joe DeMayo. A lot of comments, a lot of questions. We're not ignoring the questions. Joe even kind of touched on some of those things briefly just moments ago, talking about the pitching staff. People are talking about pitching staff of the Rumble Ponies, I should mention. People asking things about Ronnie Mauricio. So we'll get into all of that stuff coming up in just a moment with Joe DeMayo. If you're watching us live for the first time, don't worry. This is just a 10-second ad spot. I promise you will not have to sit through a long break. But it is John Sapanaro. It's Matt Ibby Ibanez. Our guest this week, Joe DeMayo, a.k.a. PSL to Flushing. It's Till Mets Do Us Part. We will be right back. Yo, just like that, we are back with Till Mets Do Us Part. We're live on YouTube. We're live on Twitter like we are each and every single Wednesday. We start at 5:30 Eastern Standard Time, and that's exactly what we did here today. Watching the show live here on YouTube is the best way to become a full-fledged member of the show. Your questions, your comments, your concerns, your heckles, all of that stuff come in real time. We can see them. We can react to them. Maybe it'll bring up a topic of conversation we didn't even expect to have. But if you can't do that, we understand. Don't worry. You can watch the entire show when we're done recording over on our YouTube channel, which is appropriately called Till Mets Do Us Part. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Till Mets Do Us Part. And if you can't do any of that, you just want to listen to the show, you can do that too. Starting tomorrow morning, courtesy of the Premier Podcast Network, wherever it is you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, all of those places and more. You can download, listen, all that fun stuff. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez. We're here every week. We're the host of the show. Our guest this week is Joe DeMayo from the Mets Pod on SNY. He also does unbelievable work forever covering the Mets minor leagues, and that's what we're really talking about here. Joe, I want to ask you about the two prospects they got back for Verlander. We touched on Gilbert a little bit. And, he's ranked very high on most lists, yours included. But a lot of people seem to think, or maybe a little bit more excited is the word, for Clifford. Is that purely based on the unknown / untapped potential? He's obviously a little bit further back than Gilbert. So your thoughts on those two guys? Obviously you have Gilbert ranked higher than Clifford, but your thoughts on those two guys and the differences between them?
Yeah, so Clifford, I think the excitement is warranted. So going back to last year, he was ranked inside the top 100, top 90, something like that for MLB Pipeline for prospects in the entire draft class. However, he had a commitment to Vanderbilt, and there are a few colleges in this country that if a high school baseball player is committed to that college and they don't go in the first 3 rounds, let's call it, they're going to that college.
So Vanderbilt's a factory.
Yeah, so he fell all the way to the 11th round. So at that point, Ryan Clifford was going to always be the best available player in the draft, like on the draft board. His name was always going to be on the top, and no one was going to take him until the 19th round and just take him for the sake of taking him and maybe build the relationship for a month. So that way, maybe you redraft him in a couple of years. But when the Astros took him in the 11th round, definitely raised some eyebrows, because 11th round is the first round of day 3, which is where guys who fell out of day 2 that trickled into day 3 and take the opportunity there. And they gave him second round money. They gave him over $1.2 million. They gave him, it was like late second round money. And obviously he took it and didn't go to Vanderbilt. Why I think a lot of people are excited about him is the power potential, because we're going to talk about a lot of players in this system, and no one has the power potential that Ryan Clifford does in it. However, I think as he gets to the upper minors, I think it's a power above hit tool. So I don't think he's going to be a huge average hitter. He does have good on base skills, good plate discipline for his age at 20. But on a 20 to 80 scale, which is the general scouting scale, 20 being you're very, very bad at this, and 80 meaning you're an all-time great at this. He's like a 65, maybe 70 raw power. And it has translated some into game action. He has a very easy left-handed swing. Like there's a lot of guys nowadays. Like if you talk about Kevin Parada, he has this like awkward pre-setup where like it looks like he's like holding like a backpack over him, over his shoulder. So a lot of people have weird things. Ryan Clifford has kind of like a prototypical, easy, smooth left-handed swing. And his first at bat, he worked a good at bat to a full count and smashed a homer to right in his first at bat as a Cyclone. So obviously, first year out of high school into pro ball at the high A level. He has 19 home runs now on the year. So I see why people are excited, because it's power and everyone likes home runs. Home runs are sexy. Chicks dig the long ball, et cetera, et cetera. But like for me, there's just a few guys that I like more than him in the system, because I think they have a more complete tool set. And defensively, Clifford, I think he's going to be a first baseman long term. He's not much of an athlete. Like it's a 40 athlete, maybe something like that. And he could fake it in the corner outfields, but I think he's largely a first baseman going forward. So that by nature, being a first baseman kind of dings you in the prospect world, where it's now you better be a big time hitter or you're not going to be much of anything. But Drew Gilbert, really high on him. The Mets, I know, were very high on him in the draft last year. And just honestly, the Mets just, I think, picked a little too high to draft Drew Gilbert. Mets were at 11 and 14, and Gilbert went in the 20s, which is kind of where most people thought he'd be, like a late teens, maybe to the mid 20s, and kind of where he went. I don't want to repeat the phrase that everyone says that he plays like his hair's on fire. But this dude's balls to the wall with everything. It's an exciting player that if he hits, fans are going to absolutely adore him. It's gap to gap defense. He's got a plus throwing arm. He can play all 3 outfield spots. He's already a leader. I heard, like, even in like his first couple days with Binghamton, he's already positioning his right and left fielder next to him. Like he has that advanced knowledge of baseball, high baseball IQ, high effort. They need to get him a helmet that fits him in Double-A better, because it feels like every swing his helmet's popping up. So maybe they need a better fitting helmet for him. But it's it's 100% go, go, go all the time. Made diving catch, ran a ball into the left center gap, made that play. If he hits a single into the gap, if you're lackadaisical, he keeps running.
Yeah.
And sometimes he'll get thrown out. So sometimes he could be a little over aggressive. But you also see the headiness too, where there was another play where he hit a single into right, and he purposely, or I hope it was purposely, went a little far off of first base to coax a run down to allow another run to score. So like I think he's thinking at that level, even at the minors, and he's got some sneaky pop for his size. Like it's a 15, 20 home run kind of guy, but it's doubles, it's triples, it's hustle. Not a huge stolen base guy because he's kind of an above average athlete, and it hasn't translated to big time stolen base numbers. But this is the kind of player that if he hits and the bat the ball skills and plate discipline translate to the next level, like you're gonna see Drew Gilbert jerseys all over Citi Field.
Yeah.
Kids are gonna love him. He's a really fun player that has again much in the same vein as Acuna, feels like a floor player, maybe over a higher ceiling player, but certainly an exciting add to the system. And getting both those guys for 40-year-old Justin Verlander, even with a lot of money kicked in, feels like that was a good return.
Yeah, I think sometimes people get like bent out of shape when they're like, oh, he's a high floor player. It's like you need those too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't just always go for, the guy who's got this one elite tool that you hope plays out.
Right.
You want guys who are competent baseball players through and through and through. You see a lot of these guys, oh, great athlete. Can they be X? Can they be Y? And it's like, it seems like Gilbert and Acuna
are
are
baseball
both guys.
Player.
And Jet Williams, to your credit, like they're just baseball players. They're good at all of the phases of playing baseball.
Yep, totally agree. And that's something I think they're seeking as well, and not just the bank on a couple tools. And obviously, if those tools are really good, they could carry you. But when I say like an average regular, people lose their mind. When I say a back end starter, people lose their mind. What people don't realize is, like, an average regular is like what, like a 2-win player or something like that, and that's worth $8 million per win, $16 million a year. Back end starters are getting. I mean, Jameson Taillon got like 18 a year. Like
they expect you to say everyone's a superstar. That's you don't say that, they're going to rip you apart.
Exactly.
But no, the one thing I wanted to bring up, obviously, number one, I agree with everything you said about Gilbert. The things that I've watched so far, I already love the guy, because everything that you said. Like, as a Met fan, like I think it's all Mets fans, really baseball fans. When you see a player play like that, you gravitate to it. Like, you want that guy to succeed. You want it, because just watching that is just awesome. But I'm going to bring something that's kind of a loaded question, because it brings in it's more so about Clifford. It's more so about some of the things that you said, and it's more so about some of the things that have gone on within the last week or so with our team. I mentioned this on the show, and I'm glad that you said it, because it rings true with what my thought process was. You said that, when it comes to first baseman, you better really be hitting the ball. Otherwise, it kind of dings you a little bit. I feel that first baseman, when it comes to prospects, are dinged in that sense, because I mentioned on previous shows, been getting more in the dynasty community when it comes to fantasy and stuff, and learning more and more about prospects. And I am very big on someone like Kyle Manzardo, who was just dealt by the Rays. Rough year, banged up, had some family issues, shoulder, whatever. Gets dealt away for what I think is a serviceable pitcher in Aaron Savale. But still, you're talking about what many could consider one of the top-end first basemen gets dealt for a player like that. What I'm worried about when it comes to people's thought process, and again, the Mets could be different. People automatically think that they see Ryan Clifford at first base. He has power. They automatically assume, oh, this guy could easily replace, if they choose to deal, Pete Alonso. That is not something that I want to happen. I want to preface that first. I don't want that to happen. I think Pete should be here, and you can give your thought in a moment. I don't like that, mainly because I don't think that is a fair way for a player to come up. I think it's way too much pressure in that sense to think that he can emulate what that player, that being Pete, is. Do you think, I guess I'll just bring it all back and just say, am I off in thinking that could be a thought process? And do you feel, I think I know your answer already, but do you feel Pete should be here long term?
Pete should certainly be here long term. I mean, even if we want to call 2024 a bridge year or a transition year where maybe their expectations are, like maybe it's their expectations are 85 wins or something like that, where it's like, okay, that's a preseason projection. It's a heck of a lot easier to exceed a 85 win projection than match up to 101 win projection or expectation. So that's a factor. But even if you account for next year being, not a quote unquote World Series winning team, Pete Alonso is going to be like 30 years old in 2025 or 31. Right. I think he'll be maybe turning 31. Like he's going to be in his prime as a hitter. Yeah. So
Pete'll be 29 this offseason.
Okay. So he'll be turning 30 or 31, whatever. I don't know. I don't do math. I talk about prospects. But Pete Alonso, I think he'll be in his prime years either way, whether it's 30 or 31, when their expectation is to now be back on top. And Pete Alonso's a guy who that 20 should be up in the rafters one day. He should hold every offensive record that this organization has. Agreed. He has been the franchise player, like as much as Francisco Lindor has the big contract and he's truly a leader on the team. Pete Alonso is the face of this franchise. He was the face of the franchise when Jacob deGrom was here. Everything about Pete Alonso is a New York Met. He's embraced New York in such a big way on and off the field. So I don't believe that Pete Alonso is going anywhere.
Neither do I.
I think he's going to be staying. I mean, Steve Cohen even kind of lumped him into the core group when they sent out that thing to season ticket holders. And
Pete was sorry to interrupt, Joe. Pete was the only guy on that list that Cohen put out that is not signed to a long-term deal. And even
though we know that Epler, again, we'll see. Epler might just be. I don't think he's going anywhere. He's still going to be within the organization if David Stearns comes in, whatever it may be. But still, when you hear Epler lump in Alonso with the likes of Nimmo and Lindor, it speaks volumes, and you want players like that. It's not like this guy is going out there and hitting 10 homers a year. This guy's going out there and hitting 40 home runs a year. I don't care about the average. His job is to hit home runs. That's what you want in the middle of your lineup. And when you complain constantly as a fan base, that there's no power, I don't see the idea anywhere. I've had conversations with people on Twitter. I don't understand the idea. Oh, they're going to shop. They're going to do this. I don't know what the return is where it makes this team better. I really don't.
Because there isn't one. Joe, I've said this on this show for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and I hate to, for the repeat viewers and listeners, beat a dead horse on this, but the old adage in baseball is that you can buy power on the free agent market. And I think even as the game has modernized, I think that is still true. You can go out and you can buy a guy like Jorge Soler who has plus power in terms of ability, but you cannot buy usually elite power. And if you are, it's either coming at a premium price or it's coming with warts or both. Castellanos, Schwarber. Pete is elite power. He is a top 5 power hitter in the sport. And so to me, when your tools are hitting the ball out of the ballpark and driving in runs, which are the two things he's elite at, I don't think that's a guy you can just poo-poo, especially when your team outside of him has been starved for power. Now, it looks like Alvarez's power is going to translate in a huge way to the major leagues. Hell, it already has. But I don't understand how people are so quick to just kind of dismiss what Pete has done. When you look and you put his name up there, it's Ryan Howard, it's Jim Tomei, it's Ralph Kiner, and he played in a shortened season.
Yeah.
He would be obliterating some of these records if they played even 120 games in the COVID year. Yeah. So to me, to poo-poo it is insane.
I think a lot of people, not necessarily, you guys or me, and I'm sure a large percentage of fan base, but it's the vocal minority on social media. We all know kind of how that works. And but I think it's one of those things that they take them for granted a little bit. And sometimes that happens when you have big time players that they can be taken for granted. But I think Pete's going to end up being here long term. I think it's simply of the old adage that anything's available for the right price. I don't think the Mets were placing calls and be like, hey, whoever, do you want Pete Alonso? I think if someone called and said, hey, we want Pete Alonso, it would be wrong for the Mets to just like hit the hang up button. Like you don't hit the FU button and send them the voicemail. You at least hear what they have to say. But I don't think there's a realistic trade that makes sense that would ship Pete out of town. And to circle it to Clifford real quick, your question was basically like, is he like a replacement or something for Pete? The Mets' perspective at the trade deadline was they place monetary values on prospects, and that was how they kind of it was a whole calculus. Like it was perfectly designed how much money they gave up in the Verlander trade, in the Scherzer trade, because they matched, all right, the value of Verlander plus the value of the money we're giving for the money that we associate the talent of Drew Gilbert and Ryan Clifford at, knowing that we have control of them for all these years, et cetera. So it's all like an equation. They wanted to make the best decision that they could and get the most talent. They didn't care what it was. A lot of people said you have to go get pitching. They were not going to sacrifice talent for quote unquote need or organizational need, because they can buy more pitchers. They're going to draft pitchers every single year, and you need the player development system that has taken huge strides this year. Like if you look up and down my top 20, there are quite a few pitchers in there, and not all of them were first round picks, second round picks. Like there's guys that they have gotten more out of, and this is the first year of this new player development system under Eric Yeagers, and they just opened the pitching lab like a month ago, which is a brand new thing, which the Astros use, the Dodgers use, the Yankees use, like these teams that are constantly churning out these pitchers. They have a pitching lab. So the Mets have really been catching up in a player development world. And Steve Cohen's kind of taken it 1 year at a time. The first year was spent on the big league team. The second year was spent on analytics. This year was spent on player development. So it's now he's constantly flexing his financial muscle where he can. So I think the pitching something they're gonna learn to develop on their own and find guys. Obviously, I think Billy Epler said to Joel Sherman, like, if it was a hitter versus a pitcher and the values were like this, like right next to each other, we would have leaned the pitcher, but we were not going to let perceived need override talent. So you go get Ryan Clifford because of the talent he is. And if Ryan Clifford ends up being a 35 home run first baseman, then, you know, in 3 years, and maybe Pete Alonso DHs, or maybe Ryan Clifford DHs.
Exactly.
Like,
right.
These things will always work themselves out. They're not trading for someone to replace anyone. They just wanted to acquire the best talent so their farm system can be in the best position that it could be.
And to follow that,
I just want to bring this up really quick. Joe K saying you can't buy a fan favorite on the free agent market, which I think is an astute observation from a few different. Yeah, I mean you can, but
Shohei Ohtani would be a fan favorite real freaking quick. I think.
Sure. No, but I mean with regards to like trying to replace one. And I said this on the show a couple weeks ago too, where sometimes you just have to keep a guy for vibes, right? As Mets fans, like we were the fan base that watched Strawberry leave. We were the fan base that traded away Seaver. We're the fan base that, you know, got to watch Jacob deGrom leave. We're the fan base that got David Wright's promising, potentially Hall of Fame career shortened. Like sometimes you just got to keep a guy. And Pete Alonso seems like the perfect friggin' guy to just keep. Ibby, before you get into your question, I just want to ask you, Joe, do you have about 15 or 20 more minutes to give us? Because there are some questions that, you know, I think we haven't gotten into yet. And there are a few that tie into the comments here in the chat. So I want to make sure before we dive into two.
Yeah, sure,
cool.
Man.
All right. Ibby, what do you got?
I got to try to find it again because I lost my spot, but I will. Yeah, it's fine. I'll once I get it, it'll come back to me. But I mean, I do have a question. If we want to if you want me to go off of something else, or do you want to jump into something first, John? Because I had a question about someone that I'm sure a majority of the chat wants to talk about, has been talking about for the entire season. So
there are two.
I'm going to ask mine. Let me ask mine, and then we'll play off of theirs because mine's probably a little bit different. I'm sure everyone's question has to be more so, when will we see X player? And my question is a little bit different. When it comes to Ronnie Mauricio, Joe, am I crazy? And you can tell me if I am. Am I crazy when I feel, and I've said this, and I'm going to stay steadfast because I've been saying it on the show for the longest time. I feel that as much as people want to see Ronnie Mauricio, I feel as though that the Mets have been protecting him because they don't want him to learn on the fly when it comes to defense. And then when you come up here and you struggle defensively, you might press more at the plate. and it kind of drives down your overall value and things of that nature. I've been saying I don't know if Ronnie is going to be here long term. I've always felt if someone was going to get traded from this team, this is before the influx also, this is before that, of talent. I've always felt that he was going to be someone that was eventually out the door to help us in another area. Do you agree, disagree? How do you feel on Ronnie? I know where he's ranked on your rankings, but overall, where do you think you are when it comes to Ronnie Mauricio?
I want to just add this as an offshoot, Joe. Do the Mets like Ronnie Mauricio as a player?
I think they do like Ronnie as a player. I do think right now I'm personally confused as to what they're doing with him defensively, because I have said for a year plus now, maybe going on almost 2 years, that I think Ronnie Mauricio is an outfielder, and he finally got some tastes of left field, and it wasn't perfect because he's never played the outfield in his entire life, but from what I saw, it seemed like he was getting better. And now it looks like they're moving him back into the infield, playing some third base, which does that mean Brett Beatty is going down to AAA and playing left field because of how he struggled at third base? So I'm a little confused as to what their plan is regarding Ronnie and Beatty specifically, because now they're both in Syracuse. So I guess we need to keep an eye on what those lineups look like over, the coming days and weeks. But I think they have developed Ronnie Mauricio in their eyes, and they try to do this with every prospect, is develop them for how they could impact a big league team. And if the opportunity were to arise at some point to move Ronnie Mauricio to get better somewhere else, I think they'd be open to that. And I think they'd be open to that with a lot of players that you could read on my top 20. So I don't think that's a Ronnie specific point. I think they're happy with the growth that Ronnie's made this year. And he has made significant growth. I mean, this is a couple of years ago, Ronnie Mauricio was a top 50 prospect in baseball. Everyone felt fantastic about him. The plate discipline just kept getting worse and worse and worse. The swing and miss rate kept getting worse and worse and worse. And even though he hit 24 homers in AA or 25 homers in 2022, scouts didn't think he had a good year. They were like, swing and misses too much, chases too much, doesn't draw walks, which he's never going to draw walks. And that's okay. Like, not everyone draws walks. But his swing and miss rate is down significantly. His strikeout rate is down. I think last I checked, it was close to 8% from last year. So he's not striking out nearly as much. He's making better contact. He hits the ball as hard as anybody hits the ball. I mean, there's been 114 mile an hour home runs. There's been 112 mile an hour doubles. Like, he's hitting the ball hard. He's elevating the ball a little better this year on a consistent basis. He still hits the ball on the ground a little more than you'd like, but I do think they like Ronnie Mauricio. The long and short of it is, I don't know what the plan looks like, because it felt like they found the plan that he was going to be a left fielder and they were going to try that. And I figured he'd be up, sometime in the next couple of weeks, and he certainly could come up. I mean, he's on the 40-man roster. You want to evaluate pieces like him to see what he could mean to the 2024 team, if anything. So I still believe he's going to be up sooner than later. I just wonder, where the heck do they want to play this guy? Where the heck do they want to play Brett Beatty? I know obviously Beatty had a tough go of it at the big league level. And really, to your point, that one of you, I think it was you, Ibby, that made before about how the struggles in the field, I think, went to the plate with Beatty. And I said this on the Mets pod this week. Like, that's why we need to give Francisco Lindor the flowers that he deserves, because when he was struggling offensively early in the field, he was still 95th percentile and outs above average. So he didn't take the field. Like, that shows like a true veteran. So Beatty needs the mental, physical reset. Ronnie, it's kind of a shrug emoji, but I think they like him, and he's made some big strides this year. And I guess we'll see if we see him here in the next few weeks.
Let me ask you a couple of follow-up questions to that really quick. Shay asking one, only enough at bats this year so that he's still a rookie in 2024. Do
August
you think that's
20th.
On the table? Yeah.
August 20th is the date we're all watching.
We're coming close.
Take.
Yep, we're coming close to that, where he would then, obviously the Mets could get a draft pick if he were to win Rookie of the Year. It's a whole thing. There's a whole entanglement there. So one, How true do you think some of that stuff may be with the Mets kind of playing around with his service time? And then from what you've seen from both players, because both are either here in the case of Beatty or have been here in the case of Beatty and or are knocking on the door in the case of Mauricio, do you think the Mets are a better team? The Major League Mets are a better team with Ronnie Mauricio at third base and Beatty in left field, or vice versa?
Interesting question. Because they're kind of both inexperienced at the secondary position. Beatty's played more outfield than Mauricio's played third base. Though Mauricio did dabble in some third base down in the Dominican Winter League where he won MVP. Right. And he said that would be a position he'd want to play. So it's tough to say. It's honestly tough. That's a really good question. I like Mauricio as an outfielder, and I think Beatty is a better defensive player than he's shown. But so I guess I would lean that way, but it could easily go the other way. And I know it's really a non-answer. I try not to give non-answers, but
it's okay. I know it's a tough question,
yeah.
And that's really putting you on the spot with something that, quite frankly, none of us really know the answer.
We don't know,
right?
You
know, and so, but I just the reason why I ask it is because, you know, I think the way things are shaping up, not only for the end of this season, but for the start of next season and where the Mets may go and may not go in free agency, there's a chance that both of those guys are on the field on opening day playing somewhere. And I think
I wonder if they're having that. I wonder if they're having that evaluation right now of figuring out how do they best fit, because we talk about the 2024 evaluation, which is what the rest of this season is about, is do I need to go spend $15 million a year to get a left fielder? Do I need to go buy a third baseman? Like, I don't think you need to buy a third baseman between Mauricio, Beatty. Vientos is not much of a third baseman, but like between those guys, I feel like you're gonna have the third baseman with one of the two. But you certainly want to evaluate, do you need a left fielder? Because even though Drew Gilbert's on the way and you know, there's a couple other outfielders that are working their way through the system, there's no one that's like right on the precipice that's like, you're going to throw this guy into the fire. So I think they are evaluating to a degree what Beatty and Mauricio will be for the 2024 team.
Two really great comments. Sorry, Shay saying Mauricio may be more adept at third base than second because it's the same side of the diamond as shortstop, his natural position. You cannot take that for granted. And then Carson saying Beatty can't pull a baseball, so he doesn't get to choose his position.
Well, I was going to bring that one up. I was going to bring that up because I wanted to ask Joe. Like, I remember when Beatty was, you know, coming up through high A and then into double A. Like, a big talking point when it came to him was always his ground ball rate. Do you feel that, you know, he was up here, he hit 7 home runs. Do you think because he's pounding the ball into the ground as much as he is, because he's not pulling the ball, as Carson brings up, do you think that this is going to be, I don't want to say an easy thing to accomplish, since a majority of his minor league career, I felt like he was hitting the ball on the ground a lot. Is this something that he can, you know, adapt to and start lifting the ball?
I think so. I mean, it is some swing adjustment, and it's something that he has worked on kind of at every level. To your point, Ibby, he's historically hit a bunch of ground balls, and he pulls the ball more than he used to. Like when he was in the low minors, he was an opposite field player, and that was something that Dom Smith was a lot too. And he kind of never got into that pull power, and Beatty seemed to at the upper levels. But I think it's always been an adjustment level for Beatty. At each level, it feels like it takes time for him to figure out the pitching and get comfortable and begin to elevate the ball more consistently. Because if Brett Beatty's hitting the ball on the ground a lot, he's not going to be a very valuable player. That's simply what it comes down to, because he doesn't have the speed to beat out some things and really put pressure on the defense. He needs to be not a big power hitter, but I mean, he was a guy I looked at as a 20, maybe 25 home run kind of guy. And if he's that with on-base skills, he's fine, but he needs to find a way to more consistently do it. And that swing adjustment, that's confidence. Like all that plays into it. And Jeremy Barnes gets a whole mess of grief from Mets fans because of how the offense has underperformed this year. But a lot of players have credited Jeremy Barnes, like last year, to swing changes that they made. I feel like this year is just something that just nothing worked. Don't know what the vibe was. Don't know what caused, but nothing seemingly worked this year. I don't know if the expectations were a part of it, but I think Jeremy Barnes is a really bright mind that the Mets have, and I do believe he can help hitters going forward. I mean, I talked to Jeremy Barnes when he was first brought into the organization from Houston to run player development, and then he was minor league hitting coach, and then assistant hitting coach, and now full hitting coach. So obviously he has some stuff to prove, but I think he can get more out of Brett, and I think Brett does have it in him, but certainly you need to figure that out relatively quickly. Like, I think you need to be prepared in the case that it doesn't turn around, because sometimes it just doesn't.
Till Mets do his part, John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez. We're on every week, Wednesday, right around this time. Hit the thumbs up if you're watching live and you like what you're listening to. Oh, yeah, subscribe to all that.
Subscribe to the channel.
We are talking we're talking to Joe DeMayo, a.k.a. at PSL The Flushing on Twitter or X or whatever that thing is called, of the Mets Pod on SNY, also the minor league guru. Joe, I have two more things, and I think they're connected before we let you get out of here and we end this show. And we haven't talked at all, really, except you kind of touching on it in a couple small places, with the pitching prospects the Mets have. And I think it plays into the larger conversation, which will be the last thing we talk about, which is their offseason and next season plans. But that said, when we look at your top 10, Tidwell is the only pitcher on your top 10 list. Do you think it's a problem for where the Mets are right now? And where do the other pitching prospects that people know about, Christian Scott came up in the chat earlier, Jarvis that they just got in the trade with Milwaukee, Mike Vassell, where do those guys rank? If you don't remember the exact numbers of where you put them, that's fine. Oh, he's got pulled up. Perfect.
Yeah.
This guy's like,
you think I remember? Get out of here.
He is a goddamn pro, ladies and gentlemen. That's why, that's why we have him on the show. So, where do those guys rank? How far out of the top 10 are they? Just a conversation about the Mets pitching prospect philosophy right now.
So when I did a top 10 update right after the draft, so the draft concluded, I did a top 10 update. It was 5 hitters, 5 pitchers.
Okay. Now
they added Acuna, they added Clifford, they added Gilbert, they added Vargas. So it just pushed guys down, and that's kind of the nature of the beast. Mike Vassell is my number 2 pitcher. He's at number 11. He had obviously a fantastic start on Tuesday night for Syracuse. He took a no-hitter into the 9th inning against Scranton and gave up the hit, but he struggled a bit in AAA, but he's one of those positive player development stories. Highly touted out of high school, pulls himself out of the draft, commits to the University of Virginia. They kind of changed him into a sinker slider pitcher. He puts up like very mid type stats, like he ERA around 4 in college. Like, he wasn't great, but the Mets kind of remembered him as a high school prospect and drafted him and kind of repositioned his stuff kind of back to what he was as a high school kid. So now he's back to 4-seam fastball. He has a gyro slider, changeup, curveball, 4-pitch mix, looks the part of a number 4 starter, commands his pitch as well. Struggled so far in AAA, but I think last night could be a jumping point for him. I have Brandon Sproat at number 12. He was their 2nd round pick this year. After being their 3rd round pick last year, they have wanted Brandon Sproat for a while now.
Forever.
Forever. So they've liked him a ton. He's been someone their analytics team has spotted out, of course, in addition to their scouting. He's a fastball up to 101, sits 95 to 98. He's locating it a little better this year than he had previously. What he needs to work on most is his breaking ball. So his slider was an above average pitch last year, kind of took a step back this year, while his changeup became like a plus secondary offering. And he needs to command better within the zone. So he's done a better job of throwing strikes, but there's a difference between throwing strikes and throwing good strikes. And his home run rate doubled this year from last year down at Florida. So he's got to work on his location within the zone, but you can't teach 101. And I think he has the potential to be a mid-rotation starter, but some of the kind of secondary stuff lead him to have a floor of maybe a reliever, which I think is why he's not higher on the list right now. I know you want to say something, Ibby, so I'll let you do that before I get into the next group.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up because it's just the craziness of Twitter or X, whatever you want to talk about when it comes to Sprout. And I remember when they got him back, uh, they posted that video of him throwing that 101-mile-an-hour fastball, and of course, because it's Twitter and people are stupid, the first comment that I see is that shit is flat as fuck, and I'm like, are you 101? A guy sitting on his couch and he's telling me that's flat. Like, screw you, man. You can't teach 101 miles an hour. Yes, I know baseball. Yes, I know pitches can be flat, but at the same time, don't sit there and tell me that you're not impressed by 101-mile-an-hour fastball. That's just the ridiculousness, and I'm sure you get plenty of it on the things that you post as well. But I had to bring that up because you brought up 101.
Yeah, no, he could use work on his pitch shape, but that's what the pitching lab's there for. That's what player development's there for. They're gonna strap the things on them, and they're gonna do the biomechanics, and they're gonna do all the stuff that's way above my intelligence level for player development. And I don't know if you can change him from a guy that has a relatively flat-ish fastball to a guy with like 20 inches of induced vertical break, like Dom Hamill, who I'll talk about next, who obviously who can spin the heck out of the baseball more than anyone in the system. But you can make it a little bit better. So I expect to see them work really well with Sprout. Next on my list is Dom Hamill. I'm going to be the high man on Dom Hamill probably amongst the community. And it's because no one could spin a baseball in this system like Dom Hamill can. Like I said, the fastball, it's more 92 to 94, touch 96, but it's got that ride of 18 inches, 20 inches of induced vertical break, which is the idea of where it feels like the pitch is rising, and you see the upstairs fastball that hitters will swing through. It's because it's kind of going that way a little bit. So he's able to do that. He has 2 breaking balls that he can spin close to 3,000 RPMs, which is elite on the major league level. He needs work on his control and command a bit, but there's times where you watch him pitch and you're just like, sometimes this stuff just moves too much. And so he's an interesting one. He kind of looks more like a back end starter / multi-inning reliever. Like honestly, it's the type of profile that Seth Lugo had. I hate to do comparisons. I never do comparisons, so I'm not trying to say he's Seth Lugo, but in a way, very much like Seth Lugo, where it's big RPM breaking ball, good riding fastball that doesn't throw too hard, but kind of stuck in between starter reliever. But I feel really good about Dom Hamill. Christian Scott, I have at number 14. He's a guy that's taken big strides this year. It's a fastball up to 97, plus slider, working on the changeup, has a curveball, commands his stuff really well, putting up stupid numbers in AA right now. I mean, ERA around 3, but he's not walking anyone and he's striking a bunch of guys out. He had 11 in his last outing. He was a reliever at Florida. And when I get to Tyler Stewart here in a minute, the Mets have also done this a couple times now where they've drafted college relievers and turned them into professional starters. And that kind of, in general, sometimes will slow down development. And that's why Christian Scott has kind of been around for a bit. I think he's 24, 25 now. So he's a little on the older end, but it takes time to have that development. And he's been one of the bright spots of this system. And I debated having him higher than this, but 14 is where I had him. 15, as you can see, we're littering the back half of the top 20 with pitchers. 15 is Justin Jarvis, who they got from Milwaukee. Didn't have a great go of it his first outing for Syracuse, but his stuff has ticked up a little bit this year. He'll touch 95 or so. In his first start, he was just kind of 93, 94 the whole time. Above average slider, working on a splitter because he really needs that third pitch, and he couldn't have a changeup, but he looks like back end starter, long reliever, kind of in that mold is where I would project him. Calvin Ziegler, I have at 16. He missing the whole year. He had bone spurs in the spring, had surgery for that. While rehabbing to get back on a mound, he was probably going to be pitching by now, tore his quad while he was getting ready to get back on the mound. So he's out for the year, but when he's right, it's super like analytically friendly data, fastball up to 97, breaking ball, big time swing and miss pitch. I think he had an over 50% swing and miss rate last year on it in St. Lucie. And I thought he was throwing a changeup, and we had him on Mets perspective when we were doing that for SNY. And I asked him about the changeup, and he was like, "Oh, I'm not throwing a changeup anymore." Oh, well, cool. Really make me feel smart. He's like, "I'm throwing a splitter now." He would walk around all day holding a baseball in a splitter grip so he could learn to like spread his fingers around a baseball. So when he wasn't pitching, he was just walking around with the baseball working on it. So the stuff is still there. I don't want to give up on him just because, unfortunately, an injury wiped out his year. But I think you're going to see a lot of people just kind of trash him in their rankings. I try to keep the idea there that he's still something. Number 18, I think that's my left. Oh, no, we got 2 more pitchers. Well, we have a pitcher and a half left, actually. Number 18, Tyler Stewart, who now leads all of minor league baseball in ERA. He was a 6th rounder last year as a reliever at Southern Miss, and the Mets have converted him to a starter. And he's been great. I mean, he's at the AA level real quickly, right out of college. He's made it up there. It's more sinker slider, touch 95, sliders and above average pitch. Really needs a third pitch to be a starter. And the reason he's so low, despite the stats that he's putting up, a lot of people I talk to think he's a 2-pitch reliever at the big league level, which is fine. I mean, obviously the Mets could use relievers as well, but he's big guys. I mean, he's 6'8", 6'9", with obviously the slider, the sinker. Needs to work on that third pitch. Otherwise, you're kind of looking at, maybe a middle reliever or a guy that could be, maybe closer to the back end of games, but he needs to get swings and misses at the upper levels too, which is something that in the early going, he's not getting a ton of strikeouts in Binghamton. So that'll be something to monitor. And the half is Nolan McLean, who I had at number 20. He was a 3rd round pick this year. He's a 2-way player, and the Mets drafted him, allowing him to do that, where he's going to DH and be a reliever in minor league ball. He may have close to the same raw power that Ryan Clifford has. When he was at Oklahoma State, like there's
he had a bomb the other day, right? I saw that.
I don't think he posted it. So that was when he was in college. So like, when he connects with a baseball, like I think he has like a 470 something footer under his belt at Oklahoma State. So he could hit the ball a long ways, but that one comes with a 40% strikeout rate, which is not sustainable. So they need to find a way to help him make more contact, or he will not be a 2-way player for long. And if he's not a 2-way player, his future probably in the bullpen is closer type upside. I mean, it's up to 98. It's plus slider, above average breaking ball. He knows how to spin them. He doesn't really love to pitch. He likes to hit. He prefers to hit. But I think he's going to have to learn to love to pitch, because if he's not getting that strikeout rate down, I think
he's going to be pitching.
He's going to be pitching, and he profiles as a late inning reliever. And he's such an interesting prospect that like it was close between like him and Ronald Hernandez and Matt Rudick and Luis Rodriguez, a couple guys like 20 to 24 that were so clumped together. I was like, let me just put the more fun guy at number 20. Like, I feel like you could do that.
Yeah, you could do that. That's fine.
Well, so, we started the conversation by saying, hey, Tidwell's the only guy in your top 10. But then after that, from Sproat to Hamill, Scott, Vasil, Jarvis, you've got basically just pitching prospects to the next, to the 15 spot. So really quick, of all the guys that you just mentioned, because you went in depth on all of them, assuming that being a starting pitcher is quote unquote better than being a relief pitcher, which one of those guys in your mind has the highest upside, where they could be, the highest in the rotation potential?
I lean Christian Scott, actually, despite ranking him a couple spots lower, but I think the reliever risk is kind of what I think pushed back, because he shows the swing and miss stuff with multiple pitches. He's making strides on his third pitch. I think Mike Vasil, would probably be like the obvious answer. Like, there's probably going to be people out there that have Vasil ranked ahead of Tidwell. That's not for me. But I think Vasil's a floor player where, I don't think there's a ton more untapped potential within his game. But I think when he's big league ready, which will probably be sometime in 2024, he'll just slide in and be a back end number 4 type starter. Whereas Christian Scott, if they can really make that third pitch an above average offering, he has the potential to be something greater than that.
Okay. Before I ask you my last question that kind of wraps this whole conversation up, Ibby, is there anything you dying to ask Joe in the last couple of minutes?
Nothing in particular. I was focused on some of these. I think there's a lot of good questions left in the chat that we could throw in quickly. But I guess the only thing I will ask is it's frustrating for me. I can only imagine it being frustrating for you because this is what you do. It's focusing on the prospects. It's focusing on the farm and how it's built. I get so tired because I think it's common knowledge, but for many it's not. And correct me if I'm wrong. When you're building a farm system, your focus is to just have as many great players that you can accumulate. You can work on them to figure out positions here and there. Because I know the biggest joke is like, oh my God, another shortstop. Oh my God, another second baseman. Oh my God, this. Oh my, like, you want to accumulate the best players. You figure it out along the way because I feel as though people were so adamant about trading away the veterans and saying, you didn't get a pitcher, you didn't get a pitcher, you didn't get a pitcher. It's like, I want good players. You can find pitchers eventually, but if I'm going to get good players, that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, no, that's what it's about. I mean, if you tell me the reality is when you're drafting players, like you're drafting the best athletes in their school, their region, whatever the case may be, depending on what level they're at. And where do you play your best athletes if you play baseball? You play them at shortstop and center field. And then obviously some people are specialties as catchers and you have pitchers, but shortstops transition to third base to second base to center field.
Anywhere.
Center fielders translate to all of the outfield spots. So yeah, look, they just get the most talent you can. You worry about it later. And like I mentioned before, so many of these guys, and that's to me the fun of it in a way. So many of these guys are just not going to work out. Like that's the nature of the beast. So accrue the best possible talent you can. And that just heightens your chance for success because when you do hit, when you get that Francisco Alvarez, when you get that Pete Alonso, when you get that Jeff McNeil, it is franchise altering to have players like that. You hit on a Brandon Nimmo, like it's franchise altering to get some of these guys. So they're being very aggressive. I understand why people say it. I get it. But the reality is, most fans are worried about the big league team, and that's perfectly respectable, and prospects are secondary to them. But anyone listening, I hope you understand that the way that teams think about this is just get the best freaking players you can. And one day we'll figure out what they all play. Like you mentioned the Clifford Alonso thing earlier, and I understood the question, but it's just like, okay, if Ryan Clifford's a sick hitter, guess what? He's going to be in the lineup too. Like that's
if you hit, you're going to play. They'll figure it out. Yeah. That's any level. That's little league, high school, college, professional. If you hit the ball, they're going to find a way to play you. Simple as that.
All these guys, like they're not all going to be on the Mets. Which brings me to the final thought that I'm going to give you, Joe, which is, and a lot of people are saying this, in different ways in the comments about the Mets offseason plan. Stevie Mac, 55 shortstops, let's go. So the Mets offseason plan, this is kind of twofold, right? Because we don't know who's going to become available. We don't know if the Mets are going to trade a Marco Vargas for a pitch. We have no idea. So I'm not going to ask you about that. I'm just asking you in terms of philosophy, because one of the things that has gotten me incensed over the last several weeks, I'm okay with the fact the Mets haven't been good. It sucks, but it is what it is. I think the Mets pivoted in the best way possible. I think all three of us and most of the people in the chat would agree with that. My thing that has drove me crazy is this concept that somehow the Mets are not going to field a competitive team next year. The Mets are punting on 2024. Simply because the expectations are going to be different. Now, my whole logic for this has been if the Mets kept everyone and went on a run and just missed the playoffs or made the final wild card and got bounced, the expectations would still be lower because they're not coming off of a 101 win team that added Justin Verlander. So by nature, the expectations were always going to be lower. So because you get comments from Billy Epler and Steve Cohen about that being the case, it doesn't mean that the Mets aren't going to go out. I don't know if the Mets are going to go get Ohtani. I think they still can. I don't know if the Mets are going to go get Yamamoto. I think they should. I don't know if the Mets, to your point earlier, should the Mets go buy a third baseman? Maybe they should. Maybe they go get Matt Chapman. I have no idea. But this concept that they are now going to take a step back and not be good and not be a competitive team that can make the playoffs, to me is absurd. So just your overarching thoughts on that concept and the Mets offseason overall plan.
Yeah, I had tweeted this kind of shortly after a deadline, I believe.
I think you and I had a very similar tweet, actually, like within a few minutes
and
of
I
each
think
other.
I mentioned it on the show. I think I did mention.
Okay, but like the only player of consequence for 2024 that they traded to me was Justin Verlander. Like Max Scherzer looked okay in his first couple outings with Texas, but let's also call a spade a spade. If the Mets kept Max Scherzer, fans would be revolting that he was a part of the rotation in 2024. So certainly if he pitches well the rest of the year for Texas, I'm sure they'll flip and change their opinion there. But to me, Verlander was the one that they traded that I think had meaningful impact in 2024. So if trading Verlander means they are punting 2024, then you really need to change the conversation to you don't believe in what the core of this team is, and they should have traded Pete. They should have traded McNeil. They should have traded basically anyone they could have. They should have just tore the whole thing down to the studs and started over. But the reality is that's not the case. That's not what they did. They believe they're going to be a good team. Like this team was built to win. Steve Cohen is not interested in rebuilding. Steve Cohen has more money than anybody. There's nothing off the table. Do I think they're going to try to more strategically spend? Yes. And perhaps that's a good thing because let's call a spade too, where they spent the most money ever and it sucked. It didn't work.
Didn't work.
Well, and Joe, the thing we've talked about long on the show, they all made sense from a baseball perspective because I understand Nate Eovaldi was probably the best pitcher signed in the offseason, right, in terms of what he put up. But if the Mets lost DeGrom and signed Seth Lugo, Trevor Williams, and Nate Eovaldi, we would have rioted in the streets coming off a 101-win season. The Mets were in a no-win situation in terms of throwing money at their problems.
They had to reload.
They had so many free agents off of a team that was so successful. They were almost victims of their own success. So I don't know when people look at this, where they expected them to go. Like, oh, yeah, we'll bring in Eovaldi and we'll bring in. Even people went nuts when they're like, oh, I can't believe they tried to sign Carlos Correa. And look, he's had a bad year. It's like, what did you want them to do? Everybody said they brought back the same team. Then they tried to go get Correa. And then it was like, oh, that's great. Oh, that's embarrassing. Oh, good thing we didn't get him. Like the emotional swing is too much from these people.
And it's hindsight is a lot of it too, right? Like, yeah, it didn't work. And then Nate Eovaldi had obviously a fantastic first half. And then he's been hurt. I think he's working his way back. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is hindsight as well. And what I appreciate the most, and if you really listen to what Steve Cohen has said, and it's dating back to his initial press conference when he bought the Mets, he's been really honest. If you listen to what he said, and you go back, like he said, his goal was to have a elite farm system and player development when he bought the team. And obviously, he said the 3 to 5 World Series window, which he has openly also said he wishes he didn't say because I don't think he realized how hard it is to win a World Series. You can't just be richer than everyone and magically have a World Series. It doesn't quite work that way. But like this is what his goal was. And he said it's going to take time to build a farm system and a player development system. So I'm going to have to spend a bunch of money until we get there. Well, he did exactly that. And I give him credit for a couple weeks back, his press conference before the deadline, where he said, if things are like this, I ain't buying. Things are going to change here. Couple weeks, nothing changed. Yeah. So like he did exactly what he said he was going to do. And I think he's unhappy, obviously, with how the season went. But I think he's happy that he was able to pivot and expedite that player development model that he's looking for. And he's willing to take any bad PR that comes his way. I think he's probably got some of that in his outside of Mets ownership life over the years. So I think he can tolerate maybe some PR hits. I don't think that's of utmost importance to him. His priority is doing the right thing for the Mets to try to truly create that sustained winner. And I think there's obviously going to be pieces they sign this offseason. I mean, he said in that letter to season ticket holders, they're going to be competitive. He said in his like dugout briefing that like he doesn't want to have an embarrassing team. So I don't think they're going to go in the offseason and sign James Paxton and name another back end guy and say, we got a couple stars. Like, they may not get Ohtani. And, there's probably, like, if you really think about it from a baseball perspective, there's probably pros and cons to signing Ohtani. How long is he a two-way player? How long is he a starting pitcher? Like, if he becomes a DH and a reliever, is he worth $60 million a year, $50 million, whatever that number ends up being, some gargantuan number. So there's baseball arguments for and against it. But you talked about Yamamoto. To me, he's the perfect acquisition for this team. It's going to cost good money, where Steve Cohen's going to have to spend $150 million plus.
25 years old,
which he can. Turning 25. He won't even be like in his prime years when you're going into that winning window.
It's the move.
And they didn't send Billy Epler to Japan for fun. That doesn't mean they're going to get him, but they did
on purpose.
Yeah, they didn't fund Billy Epler's trip to Japan. Just be like, yeah, go ahead and hang out in Japan and take a look at a picture, I guess, while you're there. So I expect them to have an active offseason, but it'll be active in a different way. It may not be the huge names, the mega trades or the stars, but having this farm system now, to what you said before, John, all these guys aren't going to be Mets. So it may not start immediately this winter, but now you have that deeper farm system where you can, instead of having to trade your 5th ranked prospect to get a pitcher, a reliever, a starter, whatever, now maybe you could trade like your 12th, or, just using that number as a round number, because now it's deeper. Yeah. So that's really where you want to be. So I feel great about where the Mets are. My head could be in the sand. I could be naive. But I think the Mets are building the way you want to build, which is player development, farm system. And then you have an owner that on the drop of a dime could spend whatever the heck he wants to. He could wake up one day in December. He could wake up one day in December and be like, you know what? Forget it. I want to give Ohtani $600 million. He could wake up and do that. Yeah. So I think anyone that's betting against the Mets, you're betting against Steve Cohen. And throughout his life, I think betting against Steve Cohen is a losing proposition.
I would agree with that.
The biggest thing is, you mentioned it, Joe, the fact that it would have taken 2, maybe 3 years to really fill out this farm the way that they've done. Like, you're coming off of a strong draft to then trade these players to bring in a more influx of talent. And again, people don't like to root against their team, but I would be lying if I said I wouldn't want them to be in the top 6 coming up for this upcoming draft, to then fill out another strong draft and add on to the talent. So the conversation isn't always amongst Mets fans when they go, how come the Phils only had to trade their 15th prospect, but they're asking us for our 4th ranked prospect. Well, that's because our farm's not that good. If it's top heavy, they're going to go for that, as opposed to, when that 15th comes into your system, it becomes your 8th. Like, that's telling of your system. So,
correct.
All things considered, this is a good thing. This is how you build. This is how you go about seeing what works, what talent you have. You play with it. You see what works and what doesn't. And then you can say, okay, I know what I need to attack. I need pitching. I go here. I need a third baseman. I can do this because I can plug this here because I have options. I said this, and it's my last point. I said this when Steve Cohen first came in, and I was very adamant about that because I knew Mets fans were not going to be able to understand this because they saw big money, and they said, we're going to have $25 million players at every position. And I said, if you're trying to emulate a team like the Dodgers or the Astros or anything like that, they have their finishing pieces, which are the players that get paid, the Freddie Freemans of the world, the Mookie Betts of the world. But at the same time, they still have, I know he's hurt, but as an example, like the Gavin Luxes of the world, you find and you rehabilitate and create a Max Muncy. You have a Cody Bellinger who's now gone, but still, point being, like, you have cheaper money throughout. And then once those players go, because you don't want to pay them, you choose to pay someone else, then guess what? You call the next guy up and he plugs in. That's what you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. That is what the game of baseball is.
Joe, can I ask you just a bunch of yes and no questions where you don't give me any explanation at all, and then we'll leave?
Very difficult for me to do, but I'll try.
Okay. Does Mauricio make it to the major leagues this season?
Yes.
Does Brett Beatty make it back to the major leagues this season?
Yes.
Is David Stearns the president of baseball operations for the Mets next year?
Yes.
Do the Mets fire Buck Showalter?
No.
Do the Mets fire Billy Epler?
Definitely no.
Do the Mets sign Shohei Ohtani?
No.
Do the Mets sign Yoshi Yamamoto?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like that. That was good. That was good.
Yeah, I just wanted to see.
Yeah.
This is one from Carson. Here we go. Is Drew Smith good?
He needs to stop giving up home runs. That's really it.
That's not a yes or no answer, but I didn't think you'd give one on that. Joe, thank you so much for doing the show. We went longer than I thought we would, and longer, honestly, than even I asked you to mid-show. So I appreciate you. We just know that this is what people want to hear. This is the stuff that people, the Mets fans want to listen to and know from somebody with your expertise, about the minor leagues. And there we go, Broadway Yamamoto. Listen, we've talked about your show a lot, but where can people find your show? Where can they find you on social media and everything like that?
Yeah, I'm just on Twitter or X. I have an Instagram, but it's not related to anything, and I haven't posted a picture in 3 years. So don't worry about following my Instagram.
I think I still follow you though. I'm still gonna follow.
My Twitter at PSL2Flushing. Obviously, minor league stuff. That's the baseline of why I came to exist. So it's cool to have this full circle. But if you don't follow me, please do. Otherwise, check out the Mets Pod. You could get it wherever you get your podcasts. We're hyping up SNY's YouTube channel, so please make sure you subscribe to I'm sure you subscribe to SNY's YouTube channel because they post SNY stuff. But when not, make sure you watch the Mets Pod because we do it video as well as audio. And there's some commercials that are going to be airing on TV that Connor and myself did to promote the show on the YouTube channel. So keep a lookout for those. I don't know when they're airing, but we did that. And obviously for those that don't want to watch this face because maybe you find it ugly and you don't want to look at it for an hour every week, please.
Maybe you're Keith Blacknick and you have some kind of vendetta.
Yeah, exactly. In that case, just Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, search for the Mets Pod. And then, of course, I do plenty of writing, and there's a lot of that coming over the next 2 months for SNY.TV, and I'll tweet out all those links as well. But if you're looking for this prospect type of coverage, I got you. Like that's my thing. It's been my thing for a long time. So again, appreciate joining you guys. It's always a blast to talk to you, and keep up the great work, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. We appreciate you as well. We'll get you on here in the off season too. We'll talk a little bit more about, what's going on with the development of some of these prospects, or if one of the prospects happens to get shipped off or something for somebody else, we can talk about the merits of that. We'd love to have you and Connor on as a duo. I know his schedule is kind of crazy. I've been talking with him on the side, trying to also get him on my Jets podcast. Shameless plug right there. We may have found a date that actually works for that. So I'm pretty excited about that. But Joe, thank you so much for doing the show. Guys, Joe. It's Joe DeMayo at PSL to Flushing from the Mets Pod. Like he said, follow him on Twitter, not anywhere else. Listen to the Mets Pod, or you can watch the Mets Pod on the SNY YouTube channel. You can download it wherever you get your podcast. Same stuff for this show. You can get it wherever you get your podcast, courtesy of the Premier Podcast Network. You can also watch us live on YouTube like you've been doing. Hit that thumbs up if you're watching us after the fact. Also hit the thumbs up.
And subscribe.
And subscribe. Thank you, Ibby. I know there's always something I miss. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez, our guest this week, Joe DeMayo. Absolutely fantastic show, giving us so much of his time. Till Mets do us part. Ladies and gentlemen, we will see you guys next week. And you know what? I know it's out of the vocabulary now, but I'm bringing it back. LFGM.